A rich man found a little girl lost in the woods and took her home to his disabled mother. When he returned home and entered without knocking on the door, he was shocked by what he saw. Leon, a man who had grown accustomed to the company of solitude, found himself lost in thought as he wandered through the dense forest surrounding his property. His steps were guided more by habit than by intention, until suddenly he stumbled upon an unexpected scene. A young girl, seemingly lost, curled up at the base of a tree, her eyes filled with fear and confusion. The forest, which had previously seemed like a refuge of silence, now became the backdrop for an encounter that would change the course of both their lives. This unexpected meeting marked the beginning of a transformative journey where Leon, accustomed to solving everything with his financial power, realized that some treasures could not be bought. Grace, the lost girl, had something in her eyes that deeply touched Leon, something he couldn't explain, but that compelled him to extend a hand. The forest, with its vastness and mystery, became the stage for an unexpected connection, where two strangers from very different worlds found each other in a moment of mutual need. Moved by a compassion he hadn't felt in a long time, Leon decided to bring Grace back to his mansion, a place he called home but that lacked life and warmth. Little did he know that this small figure would bring about a transformation that none of his million-dollar businesses could ever provide. Leon's life up to that point had been marked by a void that no amount of money could fill. His loneliness was amplified by the vastness of the forest surrounding his mansion, a symbol of the isolation he had chosen. But on that day, upon finding Grace, something within him began to change. He realized that while he had been lost in his own thoughts, the true loss was something deeper, something that Grace, with her unexpected presence, was beginning to restore. It was as if the forest, a silent witness to so many solitary moments, was offering him a second chance. The walk back to the mansion was quiet, but loaded with meaning. Leon felt that each step beside Grace was opening a new door within him, a door he had locked long ago. The forest, with its secrets and mysteries, seemed to whisper on the wind that this encounter was no accident. Grace, still scared, couldn't imagine the impact she would have on this man's life, and Leon, in turn, began to see the girl not just as someone he needed to protect, but as a key piece to his own redemption. With every glance they exchanged, Leon saw in Grace something that reminded him of his own childhood, memories of a time when his life was simpler, more connected to the things that really mattered. There was a purity in the girl, something Leon had lost over the years, immersed in business and responsibilities that had stolen the sparkle from his eyes. He began to wonder if by helping Grace, he wasn't really helping himself find what he had lost, the ability to feel, to connect, to truly live. Without realizing it, by extending his hand to Grace that day, Leon was taking the first step toward a journey of transformation that would lead him to rediscover the meaning of family, of home, and of love. The forest, which once represented his isolation, now became the gateway to a new life, where Leon would begin to understand that no matter how powerful he was, there was still something he desperately needed: human connection, the care for others, and the ability to turn his own pain into love and protection. Leon's mansion, grand and imposing, was an external reflection of his wealth, but inside it echoed with the emptiness of his solitude. Every room, meticulously decorated, seemed to carry the weight of a life lived only on the surface. Despite his financial success, Leon had distanced himself from the human connections that once gave meaning to his existence. Loneliness was his only constant companion, and he withdrew further within the walls of his own luxury. The vastness of the house, with its silent corridors, mirrored the void he felt inside, a void that no amount of expensive objects could fill. The only person who still maintained a real connection with Leon was his mother, Helen, a woman who was once full of life and wisdom, but now found herself trapped in the relentless grip of Alzheimer's disease. No matter how hard he tried, Leon couldn't escape the feeling of loss every time he looked at her. Helen, who had always been his anchor, was now lost in a sea of fragmented memories, and Leon found himself unable to save her. He spent hours in his office, trying to drown the pain in work, but the weight of reality was always heavier than any distraction money could buy. Helen still lived in the mansion, but for Leon it was as if he had already lost his mother to the disease. She, who had once been a source of advice and unconditional love, was now becoming a shadow of her former self. Leon did everything he could to care for her, hiring the best doctors and caregivers, but the truth was that he was losing the battle to a disease that respected neither wealth nor power. The mansion, which had once been a vibrant home, now seemed more like a mausoleum, where the memories of a happy past were suffocated by the present sadness. In his attempt to keep up appearances, Leon rarely allowed his feelings to surface. He believed that showing weakness was unacceptable, especially for someone in his position. However, the pain of watching his mother slowly disappear before his eyes was something he couldn't ignore. Every day was a struggle to maintain control, to avoid being consumed by despair. And as Helen drifted further and further from reality, Leon isolated himself in his own world of sorrow and regret. The music that had once filled the mansion's halls with joy was now a distant memory. Helen, who had always been passionate about music, could no longer recognize the melodies she once played with such love. Leon avoided anything that might remind him of the days when the house was full of life. The silence that now reigned in the mansion was, for him, a shield against the pain, but also a self-imposed prison. Leon believed he was protecting himself, but in reality, he was only sinking deeper into loneliness. Despite his life of luxury and apparent success, Leon was on the verge of an emotional collapse. He knew that something needed to change, but he didn't know how or where to begin. The arrival of Grace, though unexpected, had sparked a small flame of hope in his heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could be the key to breaking the cycle of loneliness in which he had trapped himself. The mansion, which had once been a symbol of his triumph, was now a reminder of everything he had lost, and Leon found himself for the first time confronted with the need for transformation, something he never imagined would come through a simple girl lost in the forest. The relationship between Leon and his mother, Helen, had always been marked by a deep emotional bond, but as the disease progressed, that connection began to unravel. Leon struggled to keep alive the memory of the strong and loving woman his mother once was, but each time he looked into her eyes, he saw less of the mother he knew and more of a stranger trapped in a familiar body. The pain of losing Helen gradually to Alzheimer's was like a deep wound that never healed. He found himself repeating the same stories, trying to rekindle sparks of memories, but often received only a blank stare in return. Despite his pain, Leon never gave up trying to connect with Helen. He knew that behind the disease, his mother was still there, fighting to stay present. It was this belief that brought him back to Helen's room every day, to talk, to hold her hands, and in rare moments, to see a fleeting glimmer of recognition in her eyes. These moments, however brief, were precious to Leon, proof that despite everything, his mother was still with him, even if only for a moment. He held on to these memories as treasures, reminding himself that as long as there was life, there was hope. Music, which had always been a bridge between mother and son, now seemed like a forgotten road. Helen had taught Leon to love melodies and find solace in the notes that danced through the air. But as time went on, even music began to lose its power of connection. Leon played songs he knew his mother adored, but Helen rarely reacted. This broke Leon's heart, but he continued to play, hoping that perhaps one melody could break through the veil of the disease and bring his mother back, even if only for a moment. He clung to music as the last line of communication between them. Each visit to Helen's room was a mixture of hope and despair. Leon tried to stay calm, but it was impossible to ignore the pain of seeing his mother drift further away. He blamed himself for not being able to do more, for not having found a way to cure her. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming, but Leon knew he couldn't give up. He had promised himself that he would stand by Helen until the end, and that promise kept him grounded, even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. He wanted to believe that somehow his love was enough to keep her connected to the world. In her moments of lucidity, Helen would sometimes hold Leon's hand and whisper words that almost always brought tears to his eyes. It was in these moments that Leon felt the depth of the love that still existed between them, despite the disease. These brief instances were a reminder that no matter how much Alzheimer's tried to steal his mother's essence, it could never completely erase the bond they shared. Leon held onto these moments as anchors, knowing they were the only thing keeping him from losing himself completely in the pain. Leon's life revolved around his mother. Despite all his achievements, he knew that his greatest challenge was keeping this connection alive. The world outside seemed distant and irrelevant compared to the battle he fought daily. Leon was willing to sacrifice everything to let his mother know, even for a second, that he was there, that he loved her, and that she would never be alone. And deep down, he also knew that this fight was ultimately a fight for himself, to avoid losing hope and the ability to love entirely. When Leon discovered the poor conditions in which Grace was living, his heart was filled with a mix of compassion and responsibility. The image of the girl alone and helpless in that forest lingered in his mind. Leon, who had always believed his mansion was a place to keep the world at a distance, for the first time felt the desire to open its doors to someone who truly needed it. And so, he decided to bring Grace to his home, not just to offer her shelter, but to provide the comfort and protection that he himself so deeply longed for in his life. In that moment, the mansion, once a fortress of solitude, began to transform into something more. Upon arriving at the mansion, Grace was awed by the size and grandeur of the place, but also felt a chill down her spine as she realized how silent and empty it was. However, Leon made every effort to welcome her warmly, trying his best to make her feel at ease. He guided her through the long corridors, showing her each detail with a discreet pride, while Grace, still shy, took it all in with curious eyes. Leon knew that this girl would bring life to a place that had long lost its luster. He was determined to make Grace feel at home, even though he was still learning what that meant himself. The room Leon prepared for Grace was a reflection of his desire to protect her. He chose the best room in the house with a magnificent view of the gardens, hoping it would bring some peace to the girl's soul. Grace, upon entering, was left speechless. Never in her life had she seen something so beautiful and welcoming. For Leon, this gesture was more than a simple offer of hospitality. It was a way to give back to the world something he felt he had lost over the years. He wanted Grace to feel that in this room she was safe, that here she could find a home. As the days passed, Leon realized that his decision to bring Grace to the mansion was the best he could have made. Her presence began to transform not only the physical spaces of the house, but also Leon's heart. Grace, with her sweetness and curiosity, brought a new energy to the place, something Leon hadn't felt in years. He found himself smiling more, feeling less burdened, as if Grace's mere presence was starting to heal the wounds of his soul. Leon began to understand that by offering Grace a home, he was, in fact, giving himself a new chance to live. Grace, in turn, began to adapt to life in the mansion, exploring every corner with a mix of caution and fascination. She discovered little details that had become invisible to Leon over time. Grace's presence brought a new perspective to Leon, as if the girl was revealing the hidden beauty in things he had long neglected. And so, slowly, what was once just a physical shelter for Grace began to transform into a real home. Leon watched this change with a mix of surprise and gratitude, realizing that without knowing it, he had started to build something far more significant than he ever imagined. And so, the silence that once reigned supreme in the mansion began to be broken. Leon could hear laughter, light footsteps in the corridors, and occasionally the sound of Grace humming a melody as she explored the corners of the enormous house. The mansion, which had once been just an empty structure, began to pulse with life again. Leon didn't know exactly how or why, but he felt he was on the right path, that by welcoming Grace, he had taken the first step toward filling the void that consumed him. And deep down, he knew this transformation was only beginning, for Grace still had much to reveal about herself and the power of love and connection. When Leon discovered the precarious conditions in which Grace lived, his heart was filled with a mix of compassion and responsibility. The image of the girl, alone and helpless in that forest, would not leave his mind. Leon, who had always believed that his mansion was a place to keep the world at a distance, felt for the first time the desire to open its doors to someone who truly needed it. And so, he decided to bring Grace into his home, not just to offer her shelter, but to give her the comfort and protection he himself had longed for in his own life. In that moment, the mansion, once a fortress of solitude, began to transform into something more. Upon arriving at the mansion, Grace was struck by its size and grandeur, but she also felt a chill run down her spine as she realized how quiet and empty it was. However, Leon made sure to greet her warmly, doing his best to make her feel at ease. He guided her through the long corridors, showing her every detail with a quiet pride, while Grace, still shy, took it all in with curious eyes. Leon knew that this girl would bring life to a place that had long lost its shine. He was determined to make Grace feel at home, even though he himself was still learning what that meant. The room Leon prepared for Grace was a reflection of his desire to protect her. He chose the best room in the house, with a magnificent view of the gardens, hoping it would bring some peace to the girl's soul. Grace, upon entering, was speechless. Never in her life had she seen something so beautiful and welcoming. For Leon, this gesture was more than just an offer of hospitality. It was a way to give back to the world something he felt he had lost over the years. He wanted Grace to feel that there in that room she was safe, that there she could find a home. As the days passed, Leon realized that his decision to bring Grace to the mansion had been the best one he could have made. Her presence began to transform not only the physical spaces of the house, but also Leon's heart. Grace, with her sweetness and curiosity, brought a new energy to the place, something Leon hadn't felt in years. He found himself smiling more, feeling less burdened, as if Grace's mere presence was beginning to heal the wounds in his soul. Leon started to understand that by offering Grace a home, he was actually giving himself a new chance at life. Grace, in turn, began to adapt to life in the mansion, exploring every corner with a mix of caution and fascination. She discovered small details that Leon had long since overlooked. Grace's presence brought a new perspective to Leon, as if the girl was revealing the hidden beauty in things he had neglected. And so gradually, what was once just a physical shelter for Grace began to transform into a real home. Leon watched this change with a mix of surprise and gratitude, realizing that without knowing it, he had begun to build something far more significant than he ever imagined. And so, the silence that once reigned in the mansion began to be broken. Leon heard laughter, light footsteps in the corridors, and occasionally the sound of Grace humming a melody as she explored the vast house. The mansion, which had once been merely an empty structure, began to pulse with life again. Leon didn't know exactly how or why, but he felt that he was on the right path, that by welcoming Grace, he had taken the first step to fill the void that consumed him. And deep down, he knew that this transformation was just beginning, for Grace still had much to reveal about herself and about the power of love and connection. As Grace explored the vast corridors of the mansion, she felt that each room hid a story. One day, while wandering through a room that seemed forgotten by time, she found a small diary tucked away in a drawer. Curious, she opened the yellowed pages and discovered it was Leon's mother's diary. What caught her attention the most were the musical notes and lyrics, carefully written with passion. Grace realized that music held a special place in Helen's heart, and that these compositions represented something deeply personal. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to uncover a vital part of Leon and Helen's past. With the diary in hand, Grace set out to explore the house with a new purpose, to discover more about that music. She wanted to understand what those melodies meant to Helen, and perhaps bring some joy to the woman who seemed lost in her own memories. Grace knew it wasn't an easy task, but she felt that music could be a key to something greater. The mansion, with its countless rooms and corridors, now seemed like a maze of secrets, and Grace was determined to unravel them. She knew that music had a transformative power, and she was willing to find out how she could use it to help. When Grace shared her discovery with Leon, she noticed a change in his demeanor. Leon, who had until then maintained a reserved attitude, became visibly emotional upon seeing his mother's diary. Those songs were not just music, they were memories, pieces of a life he feared he had lost forever. He vaguely remembered the melodies, but seeing them there, in Helen's diary, brought back a wave of feelings long suppressed. Leon realized that despite the passage of time and the disease, the essence of his mother was still alive in those pages, and suddenly, the music that had been forgotten for so long began to play again in his mind. Grace, with her gentle and curious nature, suggested to Leon that they try to play the songs again. She believed that if the music could awaken something in Leon, it could also reach Helen, even if just for a brief moment. Leon, hesitant at first, eventually agreed. He knew that Helen was drifting further away, but the idea of reconnecting her with her passion for music was something he couldn't ignore. Grace then began practicing the songs, spending hours in the library where she found an old piano. Each note she played seemed to resonate through the mansion's walls, bringing with it fragments of the past. The music began to fill the empty spaces of the mansion, and Grace felt that she was, in some way, returning a bit of its old life to the house. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to use music to bring some comfort to Helen and, at the same time, to Leon. With each practice session, Grace felt she was getting closer to understanding the deep connection those songs had with the family's history. Leon, on the other hand, began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The idea that music could bring his mother back, even if just for an instant, was enough for him to start believing in miracles again. As the days passed, Grace and Leon formed a sort of ritual. Every day after dinner, they would gather in the main hall where Grace would play Helen's songs. Leon would watch in silence, his eyes fixed on Grace's hands as she glided over the piano keys. For him, each note was a journey to the past, a reconnection with memories he thought were lost forever. And deep down, Leon knew that despite all the suffering, that moment was a gift, a chance to relive something that Alzheimer's could not steal, a mother's love for her son expressed through music. Grace, with her delicacy and sensitivity, understood that music could be the bridge to reach Helen's heart, even if it was shrouded in the fog of Alzheimer's. She believed that the melodies, deeply rooted in Helen's memories, could serve as a thread of hope, capable of pulling her back, even for brief moments, into the reality around her. So Grace decided that she would try to bring Helen back through the songs she found in the diary. It was an effort made with love and patience, because she knew that each note played was a step toward a possible reunion between mother and son. With her heart racing, Grace sat down at the piano, knowing that the task before her was monumental. She began to play one of the songs Helen had composed, a song that spoke of love and hope. The sound of the notes filled the room, and soon the mansion's silence was replaced by a soft melody laden with emotion. Leon, who was beside his mother, watched with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He knew that music had a special power, but he didn't know if it would be enough to pierce the veil of the disease that enveloped Helen. However, there was a small flame of hope that he couldn't extinguish. As the notes flowed, something began to change. Helen's eyes, which had been fixed on a distant point, began to blink slowly, as if trying to focus on something closer. Leon held his mother's hand, feeling a slight squeeze in response. The music, which had once been just sound, now seemed to be a living link, a current that connected mother and son in a silent dance of memories and feelings. Grace, noticing the reaction, intensified her performance, playing with more emotion, hoping that each note could awaken something within Helen, bringing her back, even if only for a moment, to the world she had left behind. Gradually, Helen began to murmur something, disjointed words that, to Leon, were like music to his ears. He knew his mother wasn't fully present, but that moment was the closest he had come to Helen in months. The music was working, breaking through the barriers of the disease, if only temporarily. Grace, realizing the effect the melody was having, began to sing the lyrics of the song, her voice sweet and full of hope. Helen, in response, closed her eyes, and for a brief moment, she seemed at peace, as if being taken back to a safe place in her memories. For Leon, that moment was a mix of joy and sadness. He knew that Alzheimer's couldn't be cured with music, but seeing his mother react, even for a short time, was an invaluable gift. Grace, on the other hand, felt that she had accomplished something important, that this attempt to reconnect Helen to the world had been a success, no matter how small. She looked at Leon, and for a brief moment, their eyes met, and both shared a silent understanding. The music had done its job. Helen, although still trapped in the fog of her disease, had responded to the call of the notes, showing that deep down there was still a connection, a flame that, though weak, still burned. As the song ended, silence returned to the room, but it was no longer the same heavy silence as before. It was a silence full of meaning, of a renewed connection, however fragile it might be. Helen, now once again distant, seemed to have returned to her inner world, but Leon knew that for a moment he had reached her. Grace, emotional, left the piano, knowing that it had been a small miracle, a victory against a disease that until then had seemed invincible. She knew that the road ahead would still be difficult, but that moment had given everyone in the mansion something precious, the hope that through music it was still possible to connect, to love, and perhaps to turn pain into something beautiful. The first sign that music could truly reach Helen was met with a mix of disbelief and relief. Grace, seeing Helen's subtle reaction, felt warmth spreading through her chest, as if she had ignited a small flame amidst the darkness surrounding the elderly woman's mind. Leon, beside her, held his mother's hand more firmly, as if that simple gesture could anchor her to reality. The song, which had been just a modest attempt to bring comfort, now became a powerful tool, capable of breaking through the invisible barriers of the disease. Grace knew that this was only the beginning of something bigger. With the confirmation of this first success, Leon began to believe that even in the relentless struggle against Alzheimer's, there were moments of light that could be won. He clung to that small victory like a safe harbor, proof that despite all the difficulties, there were still ways to connect with his mother. The emotion of that moment was so strong that, for the first time in a long time, Leon allowed himself to cry. They were tears of relief, of renewed hope, and of a love that, despite everything, had not been consumed by the disease. Grace, seeing Leon so vulnerable, realized the depth of the pain he carried and at the same time, the strength that emanated from this unconditional love. In the days that followed, Grace and Leon continued to explore the power of music. With each session at the piano, Helen seemed to respond a little more, as if the melodies were threads of memory she could follow back to moments of lucidity. Leon, who had once avoided anything that might remind him of the past, now found himself eager to hear the songs, hoping to see more signs of recognition in his mother's eyes. The music, once just an art form, now became a vital link, a rope that kept Helen connected to the world. And with each new attempt, Leon's hope grew, as did Grace's determination to continue. The first time Helen tried to hum along with the melody was an unforgettable moment. Her voice, fragile and hesitant, echoed through the room like a gentle breeze, and Leon could hardly believe what he was hearing. Grace, with tear-filled eyes, continued to play, encouraging Helen to go on. The mansion, which had been a place of silence and sadness for so long, now began to fill with sounds and emotions long forgotten. Each note, each word murmured by Helen was like a piece of a puzzle being put into place. Leon and Grace knew that these moments were fleeting, but they were also precious and worth every effort made. Over time, these small victories began to add up. Helen, who had once spent most of her time in a state of apathy, now had moments of clarity that surprised everyone. She smiled more. Her eyes shone with a light that Leon thought had disappeared forever. The impact of this change was not limited to Helen. Leon also felt that something within him was being restored. The pain he had carried for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a new energy, a desire to fight even harder to keep his mother connected to the present. Grace, in turn, became the driving force behind this transformation, determined to keep alive the hope that had been reborn in that house. These first successes with music opened a new chapter in the lives of Leon and Helen. Although they knew that Alzheimer's was relentless and that setbacks were inevitable, each small moment of connection was a victory. Grace and Leon learned to cherish every second of lucidity, every smile, every word exchanged. The music, which once was just a distant echo of a happy past, now became the present, the means through which a new story was being written. And while Helen continued her silent struggle, Leon and Grace were by her side, using music as a weapon, as comfort, and above all, as proof that love can endure even the most devastating storms. The change that Grace brought into Leon's life was so profound that he began to see the world from a new perspective. Until then, his life had been marked by solitude and the battle against the Alzheimer's that consumed his mother. But now, with Grace by his side, he felt something new and powerful growing within him, the need to protect and care. Leon, who had once avoided any deep emotional connections, now found himself considering something he never thought possible: adopting Grace. The idea of becoming a father to this brave and lively girl began to take root in his heart, and he realized that perhaps this was the path to the true transformation he had so desperately longed for. Leon knew that the decision to adopt Grace was not something to be taken lightly. He spent sleepless nights reflecting on the impact this would have on his life and on the life of the girl. He, who had always lived for his business and to care for his mother, now faced the prospect of becoming responsible for another life. But at the same time, there was a growing conviction that this was the right choice. Grace had already become an essential part of his life, bringing light to the darkest corners of his existence. And the more he thought about it, the clearer it became that he needed to take this step, not just for Grace, but for himself. The decisive moment came on an ordinary day, when Leon watched Grace playing in the mansion's gardens. She ran between the flowers, laughing and singing, as if the world were a place full of possibilities and joy. Leon realized then that Grace not only needed a home, but also a family, something he could offer. He approached her, his heart beating fast, and with a voice full of emotion, asked her how she would feel about calling that place home forever. Grace, with her big bright eyes, smiled and hugged Leon as if she knew exactly what he was about to propose. In that embrace, Leon found the answer he had been seeking. He knew he was ready to be Grace's father. The decision to adopt Grace brought with it a wave of emotions for Leon. He felt a mix of excitement and fear, of responsibility and love. It was as if suddenly his life had found a new purpose. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, especially considering his mother's health, but he was determined to face any challenge. The prospect of forming a new family with Grace by his side was the fuel he needed to keep fighting, not only for Helen's health, but also for Grace's future. Leon understood that the love he felt for this girl was the strength that would carry him forward. The preparations for the adoption began quickly. Leon contacted lawyers, caregivers, and specialists to ensure that everything was done correctly and that Grace received all the necessary support. He wanted nothing to be left to chance, for every detail to be carefully planned to give Grace the life she deserved. At the same time, Leon prepared himself emotionally for this new phase of his life. He knew he was about to face challenges he had never imagined, but the idea of being able to offer Grace a true home, where she would be loved and cared for, was stronger than any doubt he might have had. When the day came for the adoption to be finalized, Leon felt that something inside him had changed forever. As he held the documents in his hands, he realized that he wasn't just adopting Grace, he was adopting a new life, a new chance to be happy. Grace, upon hearing the news, ran into Leon's arms, and in that moment, both knew they were exactly where they were meant to be. The mansion, once a symbol of loneliness and pain, now became a true home, where love and hope were reborn every day. And so, Leon, who had once been just a wealthy and lonely man, finally became a father, and that he knew was the greatest treasure he could ever have. With Grace's adoption, the mansion that had once been a place of silence and sorrow began to transform into something new, something Leon could never have imagined. Grace's vibrant presence brought new life to the once cold and desolate corridors. Where there had previously been only the distant sound of the clock marking the hours, now there was laughter, quick footsteps, and the constant sound of music. The house, which had once seemed like an impenetrable fortress, began to open up, revealing forgotten corners now filled with the warmth and joy that Grace carried with her. Each day was a new discovery, a new opportunity to turn that space into a true home. Leon, who had always maintained a reserved demeanor, now found himself involved in activities he never thought he would do. He allowed himself to be part of Grace's life, participating in her games, listening to her stories, and engaging in her adventures around the mansion. Every laugh from Grace was a reminder that, despite all the hardships, he had made the right choice. The house, which had once been a refuge of solitude, now pulsed with energy and life. Leon felt that every corner of the mansion was being renewed, not just physically, but spiritually. And as he watched Grace transform that place, Leon realized that he too was being transformed. The relationship between Leon and Grace evolved naturally and deeply. What had begun as a simple act of compassion and responsibility was now becoming a strong and unbreakable bond. Grace, with her joy and innocence, taught Leon something he had forgotten: how to love without reservations, how to open up to the unexpected, and how to find beauty in the simple things in life. Every day with Grace was a lesson in living, and Leon, who had once seen himself as a man hardened by time and circumstances, now allowed himself to feel again. The mansion, with its grandeur, became the stage where this new life flourished, where Leon rediscovered what truly mattered. Martha, the faithful housekeeper who had cared for the mansion for years, watched the transformation with keen and at first somewhat skeptical eyes. She, who had always kept everything under control, now found herself facing a new dynamic that threatened to completely change the rhythm of the house. However, seeing the happiness that Grace brought to Leon and everyone around, Martha began to realize that these changes were, in fact, for the better. The laughter of a child, the music playing through the corridors, the sunlight streaming through the windows, all of this was part of a new reality that Martha could no longer deny. She knew that the mansion would never be the same again, and for that, she was ready to embrace the change. As time went on, the mansion became more welcoming, more alive. The walls that had once seemed cold and distant now seemed to vibrate with Grace's energy. The decorations that had once been merely aesthetic elements began to come to life, as if each object, each piece of furniture was being touched by the revitalizing spirit that the girl brought with her. Leon, who had once isolated himself in his office, now spent more time in the common areas of the house, enjoying the company of Grace and Martha. The mansion, which had once been just an imposing structure, was now becoming a true home, where love and hope flourished with each new day. The change in the mansion was so profound that even the occasional visitors began to notice. Friends and acquaintances who visited the house were surprised to see the transformation that had taken place. What had once been a gloomy and heavy place was now a warm and lively environment. Leon, who had always been seen as a distant and reserved man, was now seen as a loving and dedicated father. And Grace, with her contagious energy, became the center of this new reality, the force that kept everything in motion. The mansion, once a symbol of loneliness, was now a vibrant home where each day brought new possibilities and where the future was welcomed with a smile. Martha, who had always been the silent guardian of the mansion, watched with care each change that occurred around her. Since Grace's arrival, she noticed that the meticulously established routine of the house was beginning to be challenged. At first, Martha resisted the changes, maintaining her rigid posture and dedication to work as a way to preserve the order she had always known. Grace, with her energy and spontaneity, was like a breath of fresh air that, to Martha, initially seemed to disrupt the balance she had fought so hard to maintain. However, as the days passed, Martha began to realize that this disorder brought with it something new and necessary, the joy that had long been missing from that place. Grace, with her gentle and curious nature, approached Martha with an open heart, trying to earn the trust of the woman who, in her eyes, was a figure of authority and security. Martha, on the other hand, found herself torn between maintaining her professional distance and yielding to Grace's kindness. The girl, with her simple and sincere gestures, began to melt the barriers that Martha had erected over the years. Grace offered help with small tasks, asked questions about the house and shared her discoveries with an enthusiasm that Martha couldn't ignore. Gradually, Martha's heart, once hardened by time and responsibility, began to open to this new relationship. The transformation in the relationship between Martha and Grace was subtle but profound. What had once been a formal and distant interaction now began to evolve into a genuine connection. Martha, who had always been reserved and serious, began to smile more, to share stories of her own childhood, and even to teach Grace some of the skills she had acquired over the years. Grace, with her insatiable curiosity, absorbed every word, every lesson, as if they were treasures. The house, which had once been merely a workspace for Martha, now began to feel more like a home, where she not only fulfilled her duties, but also found a new sense of fulfillment. Leon, noticing the change in the dynamic between Martha and Grace, felt a deep sense of relief. He knew how much Martha meant to the house and how she had been a pillar of stability during the difficult years. Seeing Martha opening up to Grace and accepting the changes the girl brought gave Leon the certainty that adopting Grace had been the right decision in every aspect. The mansion, which had once seemed divided between the old and the new, was now coming together in an unexpected harmony. Martha, with her wisdom and experience, became not just a housekeeper, but also a maternal figure, offering Grace the kind of care that only someone with years of dedication could provide. Over time, the friendship between Martha and Grace blossomed in a way that no one could have predicted. Martha, who had always been a firm and constant presence, now found herself involved in activities that went beyond her traditional responsibilities. She became a confidant, a guide, and even a companion in Grace's games and small adventures around the mansion. Leon, seeing this new dynamic, felt that the house had finally transformed into something more than just an imposing structure. It had become a home, where each person had their place and their role in the new family they were forming. The relationship between Martha and Grace became one of the pillars of this new life that everyone was building together. Martha's initial resistance gave way to full acceptance, and with that, the mansion gained a new vibe, a new sense of community and mutual support. Grace, by Martha's side, learned valuable lessons about respect, patience, and the value of a truly welcoming home. And Martha, in turn, discovered that even after so many years of service, there was still room for growth, for new experiences, and above all, for love. Leon, watching all this, felt deeply grateful for having made the decision to bring Grace into his life, knowing that together they were creating something that could withstand time and adversity. The musical bond that began to form between Grace and Helen continued to grow, transforming into something deeper and more meaningful than anyone could have imagined. Music, which had once been just a distant echo of a past life, now became a bridge between generations, connecting Grace to Helen's story and by extension to Leon. Each session at the piano was an act of love and devotion, where Grace, with her innocence and passion, sought to bring a bit of joy to Helen's heart. Music was her tool, her secret language, and each note played was an attempt to revive the dormant memories in Helen's mind, bringing her back, even if just for brief moments, to the present. Helen, no matter how immersed she was in the shadows of Alzheimer's, responded to the music in a way that went beyond Leon's understanding. When Grace played, it was as if a window opened in Helen's mind, allowing fragments of her old life to resurface, even if only for moments. These moments of lucidity were precious, both for Helen and for Leon, who saw in music a way to keep the connection with his mother alive. Music, unlike other attempts at communication, seemed to have an almost magical effect, allowing Helen to navigate through the fog of the disease and find small pieces of herself. For Grace, these moments were like small victories, proof that love and dedication could indeed make a difference. As time went on, music became a central part of life in the mansion. Leon, who had once avoided the painful memories associated with his mother's songs, now found himself eager to hear Grace play. He knew that each note, each melody, had the power to bring back something that Alzheimer's was trying to steal. The musical afternoons became a ritual, a sacred moment where everyone in the house gathered to witness the transformative power of music. Martha, who had once kept her distance, now joined Leon and Grace sitting quietly, absorbing the beauty of those moments. Music, once just an echo of the past, now was the force that united everyone in an unbreakable bond. Over time, Grace began composing her own melodies, inspired by Helen's songs. She wanted to create something new, something that could be a bridge between the past and the present. Leon, upon hearing these new compositions, felt that Grace was, in a way, continuing his mother's legacy. The new melodies were gentle but full of emotion and seemed to have the same effect on Helen as the old songs. Each new composition was a gift, not only for Helen, but for the entire family now forming in the mansion. Grace, with her creativity and dedication, was helping to create a new story, where music was the thread that connected all the moments, the good and the bad, into a rich and complex tapestry. The impact of the music wasn't limited to just Helen and Leon. The entire mansion seemed to benefit from the healing power of the melodies that Grace brought within its walls. Even the gardens, which had once seemed so quiet and stagnant, now appeared more alive, as if every flower, every tree was responding to the changing atmosphere. Leon began to realize that music wasn't just an art form, but a powerful tool for healing and transformation. He saw Grace as a true guardian of this power, someone who, despite her youth, understood the depth of what she was doing. And with each new musical session, the hope that Helen could somehow remain connected to the world grew stronger. The continuation of this musical bond brought renewal to everyone in the mansion. Leon, who had once felt alone in his fight against Alzheimer's, now saw that he was no longer alone. Grace and Martha were by his side, each contributing in a unique way to keeping the flame of hope alive. Music, which had always been a symbol of joy and love in Helen's life, now became the symbol of unity and resilience for the entire family. And as the notes continued to fill the air, Leon felt that despite all the adversities, there was still something worth fighting for, something that music, with its subtle magic, helped to keep alive. The journey that began with an unexpected encounter in the forest now culminated in the formation of a new family, where bonds of love and commitment transcended blood ties. Leon, Grace, Helen, and Martha, each with their own stories and scars, found renewed meaning in their lives by coming together around a common purpose, to care for each other and transform the mansion into a true home. Leon, who once saw himself as a solitary man, discovered that true wealth lay not in his possessions, but in the relationships he cultivated. Grace, with her vibrant presence and resilient spirit, became the glue that held everyone together, bringing light to the darkest corners of their lives. Daily life brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and learning. Leon, now as an adoptive father, dedicated himself to giving Grace a childhood she could never have dreamed of. He taught her valuable lessons about life, about responsibility, and above all about the power of love and compassion. Grace, in turn, taught Leon the importance of simplicity and joy in the little things. Every day in the mansion was a discovery, a new adventure, where the roles of mentor and learner alternated among them all. Martha, observing this dynamic, felt deeply touched by the transformation and began to see her own life in a new light. Helen, despite the limitations imposed by Alzheimer's, continued to be a vital link in the family. Her moments of lucidity, though rare, were welcomed with great joy by all. In those moments, the music that Grace played became even more significant, serving as a channel through which Helen could express her love and gratitude. Leon never tired of watching these moments, feeling that despite all the difficulties, there was something eternal in the connection he shared with his mother. Helen's presence, even in her fragility, was a constant reminder that family was not defined only by happy moments, but by the strength with which they faced the storms together. Over time, the new family began to create its own traditions. Small daily rituals, like the musical moments at sunset or the lunches in the garden, became sacred events that everyone looked forward to with anticipation. These moments of connection were not only important for strengthening the bonds between them, but also for creating memories that, despite everything, would endure. Leon, who once feared the future, now looked forward with hope, knowing that with Grace and Martha by his side, and with Helen's still living presence, he had something worth fighting for. The mansion, once a symbol of loneliness, now was a place where life flourished in all its forms. The changes in the mansion did not go unnoticed by the few visitors who still kept in touch with Leon. Friends and relatives who had once avoided the house due to its gloomy atmosphere were now greeted by a warm, laughter-filled environment. They were surprised by the transformation, but also deeply moved to see how Leon, Grace, Martha, and Helen had come together to create a new life. The mansion, which had once seemed like a museum of lost memories, now was a symbol of renewal and overcoming. Leon felt a quiet pride as he saw how his house had become a refuge, not just for his new family, but for everyone who entered. Thus, the new family formed by Leon, Grace, Helen, and Martha found in the mansion a true home where the past was respected, the present was lived with intensity, and the future was awaited with hope. Life continued to present its challenges, especially with Helen's health, but the strength of the love that united them all was greater than any obstacle. Together, they had created something rare and precious, a family built not just by fate, but by the conscious choice to love and support each other, no matter the circumstances. And as they looked to the horizon, they knew that together they could face any storm because they had found in each other the true meaning of home. Throughout this journey, we have seen how the power of love, music, and human connection can transform lives and create bonds that transcend adversity. Leon, Grace, Helen, and Martha have shown us that even in the face of the most difficult challenges, it is possible to find hope, renew faith, and build something truly beautiful. But now, it's time to look at your own life. What challenges are you facing? What can you learn from this story to apply in your daily life? Perhaps like Leon, you need to reevaluate what really matters in your life. Is financial success enough to fill the emptiness you feel? Or maybe, like Grace, you have a talent or passion that you could use to bring joy and healing to others. For Grace, music was the key to opening hearts and restoring connections. And for you, what is the key that can open doors in your life? Think about it. Now I want to challenge you a little more. What would you do if you were in Leon's place? Would you have the courage to open your heart and your home to someone like Grace? Would you be able to fight through adversity and create a new beginning? These are the kinds of questions that can lead to great personal transformations. It's not enough to just watch or listen to stories like this. You need to act, to make decisions that change the course of your life. So, what are you going to do today to create a positive change in your story? Before we finish, I want to invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. How did this story resonate with you? What impacted you the most? And most importantly, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Remember, transformation begins with action, and your journey can inspire others who are facing similar challenges. Let's keep this conversation going, exchange ideas, and together build a community where love, overcoming obstacles, and hope are always celebrated. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take a moment now to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any new content, and you can continue learning and being inspired by stories that touch the heart and soul. We are just beginning this journey, and there is so much more to come. So join us and be part of this community that values growth, empathy, and the power to transform lives.